A warm welcome to all of our attendees today. I am Kathy Perna, the Executive Director for ISM New Jersey. Today's webinar program will be the final program in our series, Perspectives for the Procurement Function, where our panel will be discussing the long-term strategies. Please note that the session will be recorded and available in our on-demand webinar listing on our website homepage. Please also use the Q&A tab or the chat bar for all of your questions. Our moderator for today will be Molly Louthan, who is the North American lead for the state of Flux, based in Chicago with over 15 years of experience working directly with large Fortune 500 organizations. She brings a broad range of experience and skills, including procurement, strategy, development, and execution, supplier relationship management strategy, development and execution, communication and stakeholder engagement strategy, category management and strategic sourcing, emerging market sourcing, and local procurement programs. Her first exposure to the procurement and supply chain function was as a consultant with trading partners, managing RFPs through e-auctions. She moved into a business development role in managing high-level relationships with her clients and providing procurement and technology strategy. Please give a warm welcome to Molly as she leads us in today's panel and our discussion.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Appreciate you having me back. Hopefully some of you got to hear my presentation a couple weeks ago on supplier management data that we saw coming into COVID, and some of the research that we had done around supplier management that gave us some of the heads up about what could be possible issues that we were going to be facing in procurement when it comes to COVID-19. I'm excited today to take the moderator role. We have a panel of 5 fantastic procurement leaders that all have different backgrounds and different perspectives. And our focus here today is talking a little bit about some of their experiences that have happened throughout COVID-19, but also talking about what's next and what some of them are going to be doing, and as well as some of the things that they will be advising you all to do that are more future forward. At State of Flux, we always say never waste a good crisis. So I think COVID-19 has definitely been one of the biggest crises that we've had business-wise. So being able to take a look at what you need to learn from the past, and these are some great leaders that we're going to be learning from today. And I would just like to let you all know, if you do have any questions, if you can chat them through, and Kathy will be able to ask them out loud to the panelists at the Q&A towards the end of the session. So if you do have a question either for all of the panelists or for a specific panelist, please use the chat function within Zoom to send those questions through, and please participate. All right, great. So first up in the panelist hot seat, we've got Tom Cook. Tom Cook is the Managing Director for Blue Tiger International. He supports companies and executives in managing their business models, supply chains, and international development. And most recently, he has been looking at ways on looking at risk and how the pandemic has been able to change some of those strategies and build some mitigation strategies. So Tom, thank you and welcome being the first panelist up. My kickoff question to you is, what do you think was the biggest blind spot for companies going into COVID?
Okay, well, thank you all. Good afternoon to everyone. First of all, let me thank ISM and Kathy Perna in New Jersey as the Executive Director, because it's people like her and organizations like ISM that create this connectivity that makes it all easier for us to do business. So I wanted to put that in there. But to answer you specifically your question, Molly, is I actually have 3 things that I think were the biggest blind spot. I think the first is how quickly the pandemic became disruptive to people's lives and businesses, and particularly in the supply chain. And the 2 sides of the supply chain means suppliers who are supplying product and customers who are buying that product. the disruption was huge. It's still existing today. And I even believe in certain verticals, it's going to get worse as we get into July and August for sure. And I think that a bigger blind spot was how quick this disruption moved from quietly coming out of China in December and January, and people looking at it kind of cautiously. And then all of a sudden, when March 1st came around, this thing was moving at 90 miles an hour. And I don't really believe that most people were prepared. Somebody uses a number of about 7 to 10% of companies were prepared. I'm not even sure it hits that amount. And I think the greatest impact is that lack of preparedness has caused the issues to be significantly amplified and significantly more robust.
All right, great. And then introducing next, we have Ron Fijalkowski, and he is the Senior Vice President of Digital Supply Chain Solutions, SBI, and he is responsible for developing the digitized supply chain solutions around MRO, and was heavily involved with New York City, providing products for the mayor and Department of Education around PPE, soaps, and etc. So great to have him on as well. And Ron, first question, where do you see the most significant gaps in digitizing supply chain?
Right. Thank you, Molly, and thank you, ISM, for having me this afternoon. I think the real problem, was that everybody talks about digital and digitizing, and the problem is that we all rely so heavily on established relationships and the transactions that flow between all our companies. And everybody, given the volumes that are going on in today's world, where it's all digital, right? There's all interconnects, if it go back to EDI or whatever technology you're using. But when this hit, I think the problem was that all of those technologies take time to develop. None of them are instant. And, the process for establishing your digital process typically is an onboarding process. There's a lot of human interaction, and it's not and then you go through testing and you pass transactions back and forth. And I'm even skipping the idea of establishing your relationships. So when this hit, we were forced to rely on a ton of non-digital processes, to be quite frank, because you did not have the time to establish those relationships. I know IBM's been out there trying to do a process called rapid supplier contacts using blockchain, but nobody was ready for all of that at this moment. And you did not, if we switched from working from shipping PPE in little boxes to shipping truckloads, working directly with manufacturers, where the connections between us and those manufacturers didn't even exist prior to this. So I think the biggest gap is, there are standards. The standards are usually different between each company and trading partner. They're not completely consistent, and it takes time to establish them. So if we're going to be able to react in the future, some of those standards have to become simpler, and the ability to just turn on. Like, as a consumer, I can buy anywhere I want anytime, but as a company to do an interconnect, it's not as simple as that. It's not just log on to the website and get my credit card out. So I think that's where, blockchain hopefully is going to be the solution, but I still think we got a ways to go to get there.
Okay. Great, thank you. Next up, we have Luz Cazeneuve, Director of Operations for Dastech, which is a chemical supply company. And for you, Luz, I was looking to see what has been the biggest change in how you work with your suppliers.
Okay, thank you for having me. It's my first webinar. So this pandemic took us a little bit out of our comfort zone in a way, because we needed to do a few things. Also, have people working from home, set them up, making sure that they will be able to continue working efficiently. So that was one area. And then in the purchasing side, I think we were a little bit more prepared because we were coming from the 301 tariffs that had a big impact in our business, in which we needed to look at have secondary suppliers for some of the products that we bring in, look in other markets. In addition to that, in this type of situation, you need to be able to make decisions very quickly. You gather information from your suppliers to see what's going on. Let's say for us was in China, and based on that information, you had to make decisions right away. So we use a couple of new products that we have never used before. One was WeChat, which allowed us to keep in contact with our offices, even at night, our time, and get the information quickly. That in turn allowed us to make decisions on purchasing products. Okay, right now we gave orders, on the phone, a little bit less restrictive. So that was one of the biggest things. The other is flexibility. In a commitment that you have to have with your supplier as well as with your customer. Because right now, the market conditions are such that you might need to move product from one point to another, just because of the one lane might be better served by the logistics, the transportation. Your cost might be affected as well, but you have to have all that flexibility to maybe pay a little more just to get your products. There are surcharges that some companies are offering that you should utilize. And the biggest thing for any crisis is to have a really good communications and partnerships with your suppliers. Understand their situation and communicate that as much as you can to your customers, so they'll understand what is going on, and explain the delays, be upfront. And even though everybody thinks this is a crisis, it always brings new opportunities. For us, this has been a very good thing. Some of our products, we have an increased amount of sales. And because of our long-term relationships with suppliers, we've been able to support our customers and have the product available for them.
Excellent, thank you. Perfect, thank you so much. And now introducing Joe Mantello. He is the logistics manager for Qosina, and he has 17 years of experience progressively responsible corporate logistics, as well as customs compliance management. For Joe, what are some of the positive impacts on logistics that have come out of COVID? So looking at maybe the silver lining for how it's been able to improve the world of logistics.
Well, thank you, Molly, and thank you, ISM, and for everybody for attending. And it's actually 26 years, because if it was 17 years, I'd still be in my 40s, and I'd be a much happier guy. And I got to say, out of all the questions, I get the one to say, well, what's the positive effects of a global pandemic and devastation economies around the world? So, but luckily, I'm a glass half full kind of guy. I'd like to think of myself, and do a little racking of the brain and just observation about what my company did. I did come up with a couple that I'd like to share. First off, and maybe this is a little self-serving for everybody in our industry, is I think it provided a renewed appreciation of the logistics profession. I mean, we did have quite a curveball thrown at us, and if your logistics departments were up to snuff, good communication, good procedures in place, you got through it for the most part, which luckily we did, and certainly not by myself, but my team surrounding me as well, purchasing managers, and freight forwarding partners and such. So I think that's a positive thing, a renewed focus on the appreciation of a robust logistics and customs compliance department. Second, the partnership building, which Lou's kind of alluded to before, pretty good. We had a procedure in place where we had a good flow of communication from our suppliers to our customers. And if anything, that put us all in the same boat. It strengthened the relationship with our customers by giving them good, up-to-date, reliable, factual information. If there were going to be any shortages, or we could get out the products to them before the shortages hit in our inventory. So that I think it strengthened the partnership with all. Another thing is, my company actually had a crisis management team formed about a year or so ago. And I remember us all going into a big conference room and discussing what this was about, all the way down, from procedures in case anything, drastic ever happened, all the way down to equipping all of the associates with laptop computers so they could work from home. And then we put that on the shelf. And I kind of liken it to a bomb shelter. You build it, have it out there, and just use it. Well, who knew that we would actually use it? So luckily, we did have good procedures in place. We followed our plan, and the plan worked. 90% of our associates were working from home. Productivity never stopped. And some of those associates being logistics associates, which refers back to my first point of just having a good, solid plan in place. And last, I'd like to think that what this also, and maybe this is also part of the procurement topic, is it opened up a lot of importers' eyes, manufacturers and distributors' eyes to the reliability that we have on Asian suppliers, and what could happen if that all just came crashing down. There was an article yesterday how 76% of the CFOs in the United States are now looking to diversify out of that region, so to not be caught into that position. Actually, even a higher percentage of North Asian firms, 85% of North Asian firms are also planning to divest from the region. And probably one of the most surprising one is 60% of Chinese firms are also looking to divest from their own backyard to protect their supply chain. And what that equals up to is about 30% of the $750 billion of Chinese exports. I'm sorry, 30% of the 2.5 trillion of the Chinese export market it's on the chopping block right now, which equals about $750 billion worth of exports. So I think that's about, in a nutshell, I think what sums up of all the positive things I could think of that happened through this situation.
Excellent, Joe. Next up, we have Helen Torkos, President of Regent Tech, serving the Northeast U.S. with quality road marking products for federal, state, county, and private roads and highways. Thank you so much for joining us, Helen. Question for you: what is the most significant shift for how you partner with your customers?
Thank you, Molly, and thank you, Kathy, and for the opportunity with ISM to be a part of this and to share our experiences with this COVID pandemic. Our customers are basically in the tri-state area, and when this pandemic hit us like a bombshell, we were trying to figure out how do we support our customers and deliver their products as forecasted. We try to reach out to our overseas suppliers to speed up some of the goods coming in so that we weren't caught with any type of downturn. So we communicated that to our customers and reached out to them. And being that we are a pavement marking manufacturer, we wound up seeing that the customers had more time on their hands. The roads were empty. They were able to put more down. And we thought, well, that's great. So we had enough material coming in. But then once New York City became the epicenter in the country of this pandemic, our customers reached back out to us and said, hey, slow it down. Don't do the deliveries as much because our crews are getting sick and we're not out there as much. So some customers went from 10 crews down to 2 or 3. This caused us to say, okay, well, we've got the material on its way in, but we needed to confirm that our customers would take the delivery no matter if they were working or not, and we would extend their terms so that they didn't have to pay up front or within that 30, 60 days. So we extended that term. It was difficult on us on a cash flow basis, but then again, we pushed back on our suppliers and said, look, this is the situation here. We need to extend our terms with you. And that worked out well because the deliveries went out as scheduled. The customers were comfortable enough to accept them, knowing that they didn't have to pay right away. So we learned a lot from this pandemic. We learned that you've always got to have a handle on the incoming and the outgoing as well. So communication, exactly what Liz has said, communication was tantamount. And that's what we did with our customers.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Helen. Quick introduction of everyone. I see we are already getting some questions in from the audience. Thank you for that. So I'm going to go ahead and lead off with a question from the audience. Have you found that there were high risks and high rewards to bringing on new suppliers without the ability to properly vet them for risk mitigation? So probably Liz and as well as Ron, I think you both spoke to some of this, but if any of you all would like to speak to that as well, that would be great.
I'll give it a shot, Molly. Yeah, there was a lot. We did a lot of relooking at our supply base, which I pointed, especially for the PPE, and really moved, in many cases, away from the distribution network to direct to the manufacturers, or from other importers, to be quite honest, who had large supply that were dealing with the distributors. There were risks on that. You did your best, but you had to make decisions quickly. We were fortunate enough that the due diligence we did, and when I'm talking about due diligence, I'm talking in hours or a day, not the typical weeks, because the product, if you waited too long, the product disappeared. And we had a little bit of that, where product we thought we could get, and by the time we were able to say, let's go, they had already moved the product somewhere else, and product was that crazy. The best I could say, it became almost like futures trading with pricing, and I think it was Helen talked about terms. When you were establishing new relationships, you were not going to go out and say, we want 90-day terms, by the way, during this pandemic. So you were, in some cases, you were forced to pay some percentage in front, to be quite honest, if you really wanted the product. So it was very, tense and very creative, let's say, and depending on the relationship you knew, or being able to check out relationships because they did something with some other company you were familiar with, or somebody you knew in your network, that was enough to say, okay, we're going to take the shot. And I think that it was just that scary, hectic, and dynamic at that time.
Just like to add to what's been said, and that is that a person can run a mile in an hour, or they can run it in 20 minutes, right? And some people run it a lot less than that. And the issue is how fast you're going to go. This pandemic came so quickly and became so disruptive, companies were forced to find supply alternatives. And as a result, the due diligence that normally would be taken over a 2 or 3 month period of going back and forth with samples and so forth like that, it didn't happen. So what happened is everybody had to find ways of being diligent in hours or days to make sure that their interests were protected. So I think if you probably took a survey of all the companies who went down that path, you'd hear some war stories. But I think for the most part, certainly in our circle of companies, when things were switched over, for the most part, things worked out pretty well. May have been a little bit more costly, and some people may not have slept as well for a couple of days, but in fact, it kind of worked its way out. And I think, as Joe mentioned before, I think one of the bright spots of this whole thing is the fact that companies realize of the huge dependence they are on China, and that really needs to be diversified. And I think that's a consequence of this. And companies now realize that there are some European suppliers, there are some Latin American suppliers, Middle Eastern suppliers, and even back here in the United States, suppliers that offer very valid and legitimate options.
Yes, I would have to say that decisions have to be made on a minute, otherwise your product could be gone. For us, do that, we are in the pharmaceutical industry, we don't have the choice of making changes so quickly. But we do have in mind to double source our customers. And we had started that at the beginning, in 2018. So that helped a little bit. But in a situation like this, where the product is moving so fast, you will need to be quick, flexible, and be willing to pay a little more just to secure the supply.
Is there anything that any of you all would recommend people do in supplier risk to either prepare for the next wave or to build out their risk management programs so that they can faster adapt when these changes occur?
I think that if you look at, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think if you looked at particularly the Chinese model, and you use the term supplier risk, companies look at that particular individual supplier and looks at the risks associated with that. And let's assume they have 10 points of criteria on a 1 to 10 scale, 1 being bad, 10 being good. That supplier meets all that criteria and comes out with a very high score. And so in a supplier risk management assessment, everything does well. The problem with it, it's not that it's the individual supplier, it's the country that they're located in, and the fact that in any political or economic, Lou's mentioned the 301 tariff situation, any type of circumstance, now you have this COVID-19 pandemic come into play, that makes that supplier significantly now at risk, changes the model numbers dramatically. So I think, again, coming back to the question about positive things, I think more and more companies led by the CEOs and the CFOs and divisional presidents are forcing their procurement people now and logistics people to look to other options, if not completely, to some extent of their profile. And I would mention that a concern of ours, which now is coming out of Washington, is that Congress and the executive branch are looking at creating a list of essential products to the United States, particularly in the pharma and PPE area, and probably going to put legislation through that's going to mandate that a certain percentage of those purchases be made here in the United States.
Anybody else on long-term strategies around risk?
I think in the long term, one of the biggest things is also having, build relationships with your manufacturers for a long term, not just to make quick turnarounds. Have a plan in mind and double source. Have products that could be interchanged from, in 2 or 3 different locations. Not necessarily that will source from the same region, but look at other regions that might be able to supply the same product.
Okay, great. So we've got a couple other questions that came in, but I'm going to ask one of my own questions, and it'd be great to hear an answer from everybody, starting with Joe. Monday morning quarterbacking. So like looking back, knowing what we know now, what would you have done differently to be able to be better prepared?
Well, that's a good question. As I said, we got through it. Luckily, we got through it okay. But if I were to do anything differently, I would. Wow, what would I do different? Never at a loss for words, but well.
Have more Joes? Do we need more Joes out there?
Yeah, well, we run a pretty small operation, a pretty lean operation, at least logistics-wise here, as it is. So I'm sorry, but nothing's coming to mind right now. What I would do, not that I did everything perfect, but I can't think of any. Nothing's coming up in my mind right now, so that something was as imperfect as it badly enough that it's coming to mind. I'm sorry.
Okay, no worries. Anyone else? Anyone have a comment on what they would have done differently from the start, if they would have known? Okay.
I would have. Not everybody in my team, especially the people who didn't drive and took public transportations, were not set up at home to have a home office. So I struggle a little bit because everybody was doing the same thing. I should have had that done before, that everybody had a laptop, make sure that they had the connections, that everything could have been ready to work either from home or the office. So that is something that I'm really looking into, making sure that everybody's set up to work from home remotely.
Mm-hmm.
I would have made sure I had a place down in Key West and sheltered in home in Key West rather than in New York, I think is the thing I'd want to do differently.
Oh, that would have been nice.
There's my answer. You gave me a good one. There you go.
Ron or Helen, do you have any Monday morning quarterbacking for us?
I think the biggest thing. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, Helen.
As an importer of goods from overseas, it would have been smarter for us to have multiple suppliers in different countries, because when the wave hit and across the globe, we were taken aback by the number of materials that we weren't able to import, and we kind of slowed down our production to that effect. I think now the most important thing is to have that widespread supplier chain, where if one country is down, I can go over to a different country. Like, for example, we kind of stopped from China. We're not importing as much from there anymore, not only for the 301 tariffs, but because their supplies were not there. Now we've converted to North Africa and coming out of Portugal. So we've changed that supply chain, and we want to keep it that way. And I wish we had done that in January when we started our supply chain, because our business is seasonal. And I think we're going to hang on to that, because now we've got a lot of contacts and we can diversify between suppliers. We don't have to stick to just one. So that was our Monday morning quarterback. It was eye-opening.
To piggyback on what Helen said, I agree. One of the big things is that, I wish we had had alternates, more alternates set up prior, so we didn't have to go through the crisis of setting up alternates, real time. But the one thing we were lucky with, we did start some of our reaction. There you go. I wish we would say planning, but in this case, it wasn't planning, it was a reaction. We started reacting relatively early, probably around the end of February, and seeing the changes. And that was one of the things that made us successful, get product before we got in line ahead of some people, and we were able to get product because it really was first one in. It was the first one out before before some markets got saturated. I wish we did that even earlier. Because even though we got in early and were able to secure a lot of product early, we still got caught into the crunch. So I wish we, I think future, all of us, maybe, just like the entire country didn't react early enough, we didn't react early enough either. I think that's the biggest thing is when the news starts hitting and everybody thought this was going to be the same as a virus, we probably shouldn't have listened, right? So. But staying on top of things and reacting early, I think, is the biggest lesson learned for us.
That's great. Thank you to all of you. Questions specifically for Tom, but can probably open this up to the rest of the panel. But Tom, why do you think that the disruption will get worse in July and August?
We, as part of our responsibilities to some of our clients, our engagement is to provide them with anticipatory financial information as to how we think the economy is going to look out in the short term, 30 days to as long as a year out, right? So our supply chain engineers who are responsible for this have created some algorithms based upon the input both from government and private resources, which is very readily available because of the pandemic. A lot of this information. And what we're concerned with specifically as relates to supply chain is that a lot of companies had a 3-month or a 4-month safety net relative to inventory, and that's now been consumed in March, April, May, and June, and now it hasn't been replenished. So we're concerned that manufacturers who are looking for raw materials and components and parts are not going to see them. We already see that in a number of verticals and particularly with some of our clients. So that's really the big issue that we have. We also believe that the financial impact hasn't really been seen yet. The consequences of all the shutdowns that have occurred, the government issued concerns because the PPE thing is running out and so forth, things like that, that really the big financial consequence will hit the country more like in the July and August period. And we really see in our algorithm the turnaround. While it's already starting to happen now, what we really see is that probably after Labor Day, we're going to see that train really start to get motion going forward. And as a lot of the government economists are looking at, is that fourth quarter will be relatively strong period of time.
Great, thank you. And to the rest of the panelists, are you predicting a similar disruption either within your own businesses or for your customers' businesses in the short term, in the next 3 to 4 months?
From our perspective, yeah, I agree with Tom. I think the demand is still not where we're expecting it to be because things are all not reopened yet. And as things begin to reopen, I think there's going to be some future shortages of product that we experience in April because there's more demand for certain kinds of product and it goes beyond mask, obviously. That's reacted in already, but there's other kinds of product requirements that are coming up to cope with the disinfectants and how we're going to keep areas safe. That I think there's going to be shortages again coming up as things start to reopen and everybody says, we need this. And we think we're at a stable state, but vast majority of the economy still hasn't reopened. Most of us are still working from home, as you can tell by this, this session. And soon, at some point, we're all going to start getting back, and that's going to put demand in different places than we see right now. So I think there will still be continued. So, hopefully not as bad as before, but there'll still be some kind of shortages and reaction to the marketplace coming up.
Just a comment there. I agree with Ron on that. I think we have to be proactive in bracing for the impact. It's not over yet. I mean, they're talking about the second wave. They're talking about come fall. We in the manufacturing end of it, I mean, we had to put in place certain conditions where the employees can work, where visitors can go. I mean, this is a lot of preparation. That's going to continue. I don't see that we're going to be stopping from doing these mitigating things because of this. I mean, I was on a call today and we were talking about vacation time for employees, how we're going to handle that. So there's a lot of new nuances that we have to figure into this new normal. And supply chain and suppliers, it's also very important to figure out that, are they going to be there for us come July, come September? We don't know that, and we have to prepare. We have to prepare and make sure, set up certain other suppliers to compensate for the losses from one country to another. So everyone has to be on top of it. And as a business owner, it lands on our shoulders. We rely on people like Tom, who gives us information that he's privy to, and it's important for us to be informed and educated.
I agree with Helen, and I also think that we have to be mindful of the financial pressures not only our suppliers are experiencing, but also our customers. So, and you know, some customers might fare better than others, and so will the suppliers, because they also rely on you know, people purchasing from them. So
I think there's another issue that everybody, I'm sure on the panel would agree to, because you're moving goods internationally, is the transportation infrastructure was significantly impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. You know, China to the United States and China to Europe, the two biggest trade lanes in the world of the movement of cargo, that was significantly disrupted when China's manufacturing stopped in February and no goods were moving in or out of the country. So assets of carriers, both air and ocean, were replaced and displaced and so forth. So that marketplace is starting to come back now, but that disruption has led to all kinds of delays, as well as cost increases and so forth in the marketplace, and not just on those trade lanes. It's had a residual impact on all trade lanes relative to ocean and international air freight going, you know, through all the countries in the world. So that has to be taken into consideration here as well.
Yeah, and I think in August, you know, from August on, we're going to see, you know, space is going to be an issue in the ocean, for the ocean carriers. In terms of
being limited, lose that space will be you know, there'll be a greater demand than supply of space.
Yep. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yes. It's we're gonna have challenges ahead of us to get space.
And the carriers, both air and ocean internationally, you know, they're allowed to surcharge. And what happens is that you can even have a contract in place. And if they see a circumstance where the demand is greater than the supply, if you want your freight to move, you're going to pay a premium. And
yes.
Everybody,
you know, they already have the ocean freight carriers already have that in place.
So we're telling logistics managers that in their budgeting that, you know, they need to move things in the neighborhood as much as 50% higher than they anticipate paying as we move into the balance of this year.
Yeah, I will not disagree with that.
Joanne, any comments from the logistics side of things? Are you seeing some of those same stuff that they're seeing as well?
Well, yeah, we're certainly seeing the increases in carrier costs. As Tom was saying, we're more of a parcel shipper, and you know, both FedEx and UPS wasted no time in booking, you know, surcharges of $1 a kilo from China, 50 cents a kilo, whatever it was, from all different other parts of the world. So we're seeing that. But What we're also saying, we're in two different fields. My company has two, totally separate divisions. We have a medical components division, and we have a beauty and cosmetics components division. Not the actual cosmetics themselves, but the components, the jars, the sprayers, things like that. Obviously, the beauty supplies components division took a big hit when all the retails shut down, and the Sephoras and all the large cosmetic manufacturers weren't producing anymore and weren't selling retail. That's actually we're planning on that industry opening up and all of a sudden having a sudden surge. We're actually already seeing a lot of that already. Companies are starting to come back in action. And as insulated as you would think the medical component business would be, and especially in a time like this, it wasn't as much. We did take a minor hit to volume medical because of all of the non-elective surgeries that were exposed. So hospitals, as we've all read, the hospitals are actually hurting financially right now because people are staying away from them and at any cost. But that will also resume. So both divisions of the company are planning for a surge, actually, in a positive way. We're just hoping that stays. But also, the company thought on its feet. The cosmetics division, when they saw all of their particular product lines not being considered necessary, not going out the door as much, we thought on our feet and we adapted. Well, what is still in our business? What is the commodities right now? And of course, that turned out to be hand sanitizers and face masks and gowns and everything else like that. We diverted as much as possible. Which goes back to what I think one of the users' questions was. We had to vet suppliers left and right to get this new type of product. We had the customers asking for it. We had the channel to sell it. And we acted pretty quick. We turned on a dime and salvaged a lot of revenue out of that.
Great, thank you. For everybody, hopefully you have some answers on this. But what is either your company or what would you suggest a company make investments in the short term? So in the next 3 to 6 months. Versus the long term, the 2 to 5 year time period. So what investments to make short term and long term? Anyone want to take that?
Well, I'll just throw out in the short term, I think qualified personnel. A lot of companies overreacted to this circumstance. Some may have reacted because of their fear of what was going to happen and the immediate loss of revenue and so forth. So what I've seen now is there are a lot of really good people out there, particularly in supply chain, that are now, had really good jobs and responsible positions that are now available and so forth. So I would say to all those companies, that are in somewhat of a solid position is that, beef up your talent right now because they're available, and you probably can negotiate some really good pricing because of the circumstances right now. And so I would say it's the time to reach out and get some qualified people, because as we all know, no matter how the supply chain operates, that people are the ones who pull the triggers and make it happen and function. And so getting good people will make the whole situation better. And they're out there now because I see their resumes coming through various sites that I'm involved with, and there are some really good people out there.
From an MRO perspective, maintenance repair operating, I think what we're seeing and suggesting to our customers is that this is a product line that in many cases has been considered an anyhow cost. That you can call up anybody and find anything you want anytime. There you go. And that's not the case any longer. I think we're recommending from a short term, some clients may need to treat it almost like direct material, and they need to make sure they have adequate supply and possibly have some reserve on hand, because there were organizations that had to shut manufacturing organizations had to shut because they didn't have the supply of these personal PPE material they needed to keep their operations safe and operating. So I think that we're recommending they reconsider how they treat some of this material and not just treat it like it's always going to be there and it's always available. So that's I think that's one of the short-term things we're seeing right now.
Two things that were mentioned, I'll just reiterate relative to this portion, is that one is diversify your sourcing portfolio. That's both a short-term and a long-term strategy. And diversifying meaning pulling it out of particular areas and particularly suppliers where you've had a huge dependency. And look at risk management of those suppliers a little bit differently. And the other thing that I think is going to be a more relevant factor is that through this whole decade, companies have tried to run lean supply chains. Mm-hmm. Those that succeeded at running really lean supply chains got really, really hurt by this pandemic because they didn't have the safety stocks that they really now needed, because no one anticipated this type of event and the disruption that occurred from this type of event. So I think that looking at your safety stock numbers and adjusting those to the potential of this circumstance, I think is going to be the second thing that most companies are going to really need to look at.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Go ahead.
I agree with that. I think for us, as a distributor, we need to communicate with the customers and allow them to let them know that we have safety stock for them, that we think about the future, and that's one of the things that in some instances we lacked out because we did have safety stock, and that put us in a very different position, and even allow us to obtain new customers because of that.
And I was going to say, being as an essential manufacturer, we needed to have that PPE and disinfecting and things like that. So for short term, obviously, we're going to be well stocked in that. For long term, I think what Tom said, his first point was to have the talent, to have the people that will be informing you on what's happening out there, because we could be immersed in our businesses and doing our day-to-day, but we've got to have somebody watching out for what's going on in the supply chain. Is something coming down the pipe? So it's very important to have people on staff or consultants that can steer you and guide you through something like this, should it happen again. I think this was a big learning curve for a lot of businesses, and to say we need to be prepared for when the next shoe drops. So that's how we're facing it, and that's what we've learned from it.
Right, I can agree with that. A lot of lessons learned. So if there were any major mistakes, to not repeat them. I mean, we started out with a daily meeting at 9 o'clock with all department heads, one of which was logistics, and everybody voiced up concerns and everybody threw out ideas to get it going. And we reduced that to 2 days a week, and then we finally, just a couple weeks ago, we finally disbanded it. But due to those emergency management crisis meetings, we got through it. Just to support what everyone is saying, Luz is saying about communication between the departments, communication with customers, communication with suppliers, communication within. Lessons learned.
Information is king.
Yep.
So to dive a little bit deeper on the topic of talent, what are some of the skills do you think that companies are looking for with the future of procurement talent now that we've been through the pandemic? What are some of the skills or talents that you're looking for from people that you may be hiring in the future? In case there's anybody out there that's listening that's rebuilding their resume, what are some of the tips you would recommend for them to highlight? around any of their past experiences or key skills?
I think the most important skill would be the experience in import or exporting, and someone that would be a consultant that has been around the block, having a customs broker that is well versed in shipping lines. Our customs broker emails us constantly about sailings and what's going on, and I rely on that information so that when I do begin the process of ordering materials, I know who to reach out to and say, hey, what should we do about this? How should we be going through Portugal? Should we be going through Indonesia? Are we going to have a stoppage somewhere? So it's really important. It's not a matter of placing your order and hoping that it shows up. It's beyond that. So the qualifications would be the experience of someone that knows what's happening real time, and not just something that, oh yeah, it's fine, just order and wishful thinking. So that's the most important thing.
I think experience is a plus, but more than that is common sense. Somebody who would be able to work on their own and be proactive and look for solutions without, having to be guided through, every little thing. And we are in the process of, if anybody's looking, we are searching for new talent as in the logistic export customer service department and also sales. We're going to beef up those two areas.
When I search for talent for the commercial side of the logistics world, in other words, the importer exporter side, I do like to have a good amount of experience with the movement of freight and international trade, but not necessarily on the commercial side. I actually go more for the freight forwarder side of it. Maybe I'm a little biased since I started as a freight forwarder myself and moved to the commercial side years ago. And I see a resume, if I'm in the market for someone and I see a resume that comes across my desk with somebody that has a lot of freight forwarder experience, successful freight forwarder experience, it's going to tell me that they have a sense of urgency, because Lord knows you can't work in that market if you don't have a sense of urgency and you know how to get things done on time. As we all know, move correct. So those qualities attract me, a good amount of experience over there. But when I bring them onto our side of the table, onto the commercial side of the table, we get to train them the way we want, using their strong foundation of transportation and international trade knowledge. That's the angle I always take.
If I could add, I would say the biggest things were, I have three of them: creativity, interpersonal skills, and negotiating skills. If you're trying to react like we did, you couldn't rely on emails. I think we're in a society of people like to email and chat. You had to establish relationships really quickly. That meant you had to cut through some phone networks or whatever else to reach people. And you had to have that urgency that Joe pointed out to get there and make that happen. And you needed to, once you got there, you had to somehow convince somebody you didn't know that you were real and they should do business with you. So I think that those interpersonal skills to talk directly to people in a very difficult time, obviously, you weren't setting up anything more than Zoom meetings or team meetings to do it. I think that, they were requirements, and I think that, you need self-starting skills and people like that, it's a big change from I'll send an email and they'll get back to me in 2 days, and if they didn't get back to me, I'll send them another email. What did you do lately? I sent them 3 emails and they didn't get back to me. I guess I'm done. That wasn't the skill you needed during this period.
That's a good point.
Great.
We could start World
Um,
War III and discuss millennials, but I don't think we want to do that.
Great. So let's talk about technology. Is there any technology that you all have used recently that has helped you during the pandemic?
It's visibility platforms, and by that I mean PO management systems, track, trace, document retention platforms, things like that. Those are what came in handy the most. You know, great technology can enable a department that would normally take 10 people to have only 2 people run it, 3 people run it. So we depend on the PO management platforms, both international and domestic, the most to get us through this, just to increase visibility and communication, dissemination of information around the company.
We did experiment with IBM's Rapid Supplier Connect platform, which was their attempt to use technology to try to establish relationships quickly. I think it has hope. I don't think it's quite there yet. I think that IBM reacted to the pandemic and tried to take a lot of pieces they were working on and get them out there about 6 months early. But I do think it's something that people may want to look into. I think it is something that, as time goes on, gives us some ideas for how to maybe establish some of these digital relationships more quickly. So I would suggest people may want to check in on that.
We were also a user of Microsoft Teams. It was brought into our suite of programs to use probably 6 months prior to this. Really became essential when we started doing teleconferencing. We also brought on a new contact program, which I'm actually for the name of it right now. It's Power Apps. I think it's also an MS program, Microsoft programs, but it's called Power Apps. Whereas now, if we go into any area or any section of the building and we're there for more than 5 minutes, we actually scan a barcode on the side of the door that when we're going in and when we're coming out, it enables the system to see, hey, if heaven forbid somebody gets sick tomorrow, they can see exactly where they've been and who they've been in contact with for the last week, 2 weeks. So that's a new technology that we're using right now for content.
Great. Anyone else comment on technology that you've been using or you would like to use?
I don't think I mentioned specifically the technology. What I would say about technology is that a lot more service providers, being freight forwarders, custom house brokers, carriers, 3PLs, trucking companies, and a lot of distribution warehousing companies are offering their clients their technology, which could be significantly more robust as part of the value add and services that they're providing. So a lot of companies don't have to incur either an upgrade of their operating system or a bolt-on. By engaging the service provider, they inherit that technology that can help them with the supply chain issues.
Great, and then I'm just gonna pause. Oh, we did get a question coming through. So if anyone from the audience wants to chat us some questions, feel free to send them through. We did just get a question in for Joe. So are you using that technology to monitor authorized versus unauthorized access as well?
The one I had mentioned, no, we're not. We're a little bit more stricter on that. Our office just opened up this last week on Monday, 2 days ago, for just the associates to come back to work. So no, we're not using it for outside visitation. Outside visitation is still a little bit more restricted. We have a form. If we do deem it absolutely necessary that a non-associate needs to visit, they do need to fill out a health review form. Basically asks how they're feeling, and it has to be approved by ownership for, and not a small company, but it goes all the way up that far up the chain for the person to actually be admitted to the building. So we're not using that technology that I said that today at the on strict. We're just using that that technology for inter-building movement. That again, as I said, if someone bill, we could at least track back to see who they've been in contact with and who else, before it get out of control. The answer is no.
Okay.
You're muted. Okay, there you go.
There we go. Kathy, I don't know if Kathy muted me. But how, this is a question for everybody. How do you think working from home is going to impact either your business or procurement going forward?
I'll go. I think it's here to stay. I think our perspective has been, but I think it's going to be a lot of organizations are going to go the same way. I don't think we're unique. We were lucky enough that we had laptops. We had sort of gotten off laptops, rather desktops years ago. So 80% of our people had laptops, and the ones that didn't, we were able to do things with the cloud to giving people access into the back-end applications. And we had rolled out Teams probably a year ago. So, and none of this, I wish I would say, was all this great planning for a pandemic. It was just technology trying to keep current and try to see. So we had the bases in place, and people adapted really quickly, and our productivity has been fine. I think we're now reevaluating why we can't do this with a longer term basis, and reevaluate the entire office concept and when we'll be in, and similar to what I think schools are doing right now, because we do a lot of business with schools about, are they going to have shifts and keep their demand down, and do you really need to always be there every day? Because from a personal perspective, I miss some of the coffee time and to see people, because you sit down in front, you stare at a computer, and you start at sometimes 7 in the morning, and sometimes you leave at 7 at night, and you didn't leave a seat. So but I think we're going to, it's here to stay, and we're going to, I think our organization is going to continue to do a lot more with work from home policies.
I'll just jump in. I do see a question from Jeffrey about what I was talking about before. How does that apply to the control of movement of employees? So I'll speak to that. The scanning of the barcodes outside the door is really meant for places where you're going to be more than 5 minutes. So to track who you may have had extended 5 minutes of contact with. But above and beyond that, we also distributed a map of the office. We do have a very large open office area with probably close to 100 workstations there. And we distributed a map that was hung up all around the building with, I'll call them highways and side streets, where there are the green highways that if you have to get from point here to point there, we would like it to keep on the main areas rather than going into the separate smaller aisles for people. So that's face masks for. So that's part of the way we're controlling the movement of the employees.
I think that as things come back and the world comes back to a more of a normal circumstances, a lot of things will come back to exactly where they were. But I also think that this pandemic is going to be a life-changing and a business-changing experience in 3 very specific areas. And one is going to be sales, which will impact procurement. Is that the typical high-level salesperson in big corporations going to see procurement managers and visiting with them and breaking bread and doing social things and so forth? I think that's over with. I just don't think that's ever going to come back the way that it was. So procurement will be buying more from these type of Zoom meetings and webinars and electronic transfers of information, and doing a lot more by phone and email. So sales and customers, sales is going to change. Customer service doesn't need necessarily to be in the office anymore and can be done from home. This has been a trend that has been going on for 20 years now, and this has now given it a kickstart. I read somewhere that Twitter, with 5,500 employees, put everybody on notice a few weeks ago that they're not going to have any brick and mortar. Everybody who's at home can stay home, and they're going to operate that way. So I've heard about a few banks are doing that and other organizations. So I think that's there to stay. And the events of 9/11, that changed security for all of us who travel everywhere forever. And so this pandemic is changing the whole concept of how we operate. And I think brick and mortar is going to be dissipated pretty significantly. And the whole concept of working from home will be there. The other big segment that's going to impact all of us is education and training, not only relative to the education of our children and the whole academic process, I think is going to need to be revamped, but our training as professionals, the typical going to association meetings and going to organizational events and going to various meetings where we are being trained for 2 or 3 days off site where we're all together in a room. I think that's going to be minimized pretty dramatically, even as things get better. So we're all going to have to learn to operate in this world that we're operating now. I think most of us have done a lot of these. Luz came on and said this was the first webinar. I know not that she's attended, but one that she's now a speaker at. It may have been the first one. But for all of us, we're going to have to learn to live in this world and function well at it, not just to get by, but we're going to have to learn to be creative and have different approaches to make it a successful way of getting our point across and communicating successfully, rather than in person like most of us have done most of our careers.
Helen or Luz, any comments on how working from home will impact your future business?
I think for us, we're a very small office. For us, it's an experience that at least we know that we can do it. It's not the choice that we might take in the future, but on the other hand, it gives us a lot more flexibility to all of us. We have that choice. If anything happens, we can go back and work from home again. For me in particular, I would love to have this flexibility, and I'm sure in the future I would like to take some advantages of it.
We were never a just take your work and stay home. We're a hands-on manufacturing, so we needed to stay open. The only person that went home and stayed home was our receptionist. And even that, the virtual reception here in the office was doing the job. Our part-time receptionist, hopefully she's coming back on Monday because now that we're open. But we have remained in the building, so we didn't. I would have liked to have done the stay-at-home type of thing. It would have been nice, but we weren't given that opportunity, being that we are a hands-on manufacturing.
Okay. Great. And so we've got about 10 minutes left. If there's any more questions that are coming in from the audience, please send them in now. And if we don't get any other questions, what I'm going to do is have each of the panelists just do a wrap up and some advice for everybody that's out there listening on what to do for the future of procurement, or any sort of piece of advice that you can offer those that are listening to help make their businesses run smoother. So it doesn't look like we've got any more questions that have come in. So if we can go ahead and do just some closing remarks from each of the panelists, and then I'll pass it back over to Kathy. So Tom, if it's okay, we can start with you.
Okay, no problem. I'm gonna go to the bathroom anyway, so I'll get it over with. The focus of a lot of our advice and counsel to our customers, and particularly in the supply chain procurement area, has been for many, many years is diversification of your portfolio, particularly outside of China. We've seen the vulnerabilities in China way before this pandemic has come out. And as Luz mentioned earlier, the 301 tariffs has caused a lot of companies to look at other places than China, and that's actually happened. Most professionals will tell you the numbers are somewhere around 20 to 30%. As much of supplies that were purchased in China in 2019 will not be made in 2020. So we need to continue that process of diversifying that portfolio. Secondly is landed cost modeling. I can't emphasize the importance of every company making sure that they understand the total cost of goods purchased, where they build in all the ancillary costs into the model so that it's not just the cost of acquisition, but it's the cost of shipping, it's the cost of storage and distribution, it's the cost of insurance, it's the cost of duties and taxes and surcharges and all these other things that make up a much greater cost, which we refer to as a landed cost. It's a critical aspect. The third is that there are a lot of opportunities to do what we call near sourcing, which is bring sourcing closer to home. We have in Mexico the Maquiladora program, which is a very successful way of doing manufacturing and assembly work in Mexico. You can even get the benefit and using components and materials that originate in China, but you actually do the manufacturing and assembly in Mexico and get huge advantage related to duties and taxes, lead time, and the cost of shipping come down pretty dramatically. And the last point that I would make that we're constantly talking about is building risk management into your supply chain decisions. Okay, and risk management is broader than just looking at a specific supplier, but you really have to look at now economic and country risk as a big part of the equation, so that when things like this happen, and they happen all over the place, not just in Asia or at this pandemic, we have lots of geographic disruptions, we have lots of weather-related disruptions, we have lots of political and economic disruptions that occur everywhere in the world, and we have to be anticipatory that if these things happen, how would we respond in areas where we have a heavy reliance on supply? And as Helen mentioned earlier, if you have a lot of choices to pick upon, it really minimizes the risk that you have when something like this occurs. So with that, I'll use that as my summary.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate that. Ron, if you don't mind going next, we'll go in the same order that we kicked it off.
Sure. I think, as I said earlier, we're counseling a lot of our customers that, that not to treat MRO or this as an anyhow anymore. So the big thing we're looking at is we're trying to counsel them on two things: safety stock and source of material and the credibility of the material. Like, everything's not equal, and helping them identify what they need in these componentry, and also looking forward at where we think shortages are coming, as we talked about earlier, and trying to make sure we actually do some advanced planning. Plan for now that we've learned, and this with the pandemic and the lack of a vaccine, we're probably going to be heavily focused on disinfectants and cleaning for quite a while. And until then, make sure, don't react, but look at that and be prepared for it, and we'll help them define sources and consider, like I say, including things like working with your other related partners and buying in bulk, and trying to avoid some of the cost mitigation that's going to occur when you try to buy in individual packages. Rather than buying a package of Clorox wipes, maybe buy a truckload of Clorox wipes and share them amongst people. So look at some things that they probably already are doing on their direct material, but apply it to their maintenance and repairing. Treat it just as critical as other items. I think is where we're focused right now. Okay.
Great, thank you so much, Ron. Passing it over to Luz from here.
I would say flexibility. and communication is one of the biggest things for us. And I think that people need to build relationships with the suppliers in the long term, a long-term relationship that will come handy when things go wrong. You know that you can, you know that they're going to support you, and that's the most important part, just to keep doing business. That's it.
Great, thank you. And passing it over to Joe.
Well, you know, a lot of the points I'd like to share, you know, I'm really just going to be echoing Tom. You know, it's right there. If your company was fortunate to maybe be considered an essential business, or if just your company was fortunate enough to survive this, then we got through it for the most part. We're pretty close to the end, and we got through it. Now what do? You just look back and you assess your strengths and weaknesses. What did you do right? And what did you do? What could you have done better? Diversification of suppliers, putting in a crisis management team that is effective, because it certainly might be used one day, and the ability to pivot your product line, that water, and to pivot to something into a related product line that if you have the ability, depends what kind of products you sell, obviously, what kind of industry you're in, to have the ability to think quick on your feet and to pivot and help you survive. But it's all retrospect. It's just looking back and assessing what you did right and what you could do better next time.
Great, thank you so much, Joe. And then Helen, if you could wrap us up, that would be great.
Well, I'm going to take everybody's input in the summary and say ditto. As an importer, we are at the end of the line in the supply chain. We are the receiver. And I think the most important thing, actually two important things. First is to diversify your suppliers overseas. Make sure that you have enough to say, well, if this one is not good, then that one is okay, we can use them. And the second is to engage the correct people, the consultants, the people that know what is going on in the supply chain overseas, and be aware of and informed as to how you're going to import your raw materials and any material that you need in your manufacturing, because the worst case scenario is not having one item and everything gets shut down. And being essential, we were open, but again, it was a very scary time because we weren't sure that we were going to get the materials coming in. We had customers that were looking for the product, and we weren't even sure in March if we were going to deliver. So this is now us being more prepared for something like this to happen again. I don't think it's going to catch us at a shortfall. So being aware and engaging the proper people, I think, is the most important thing.
Okay, thank you so much, Helen. Thank you to all the panelists and everybody that's joined. Kathy, I'll pass it back over to you.
Thank you very much. I just want to thank Molly, Tom, Ron, Luz, Joe, and Helen for a very informative program today. I learned so much. Thank you so much. I do have one note. I just wanted to let everybody know that tomorrow we're running another program. It's going to be our virtual membership meeting, and our topic will be a very important topic. It's change management, and that program will begin at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Information is on our website if anybody would like to join. I want to wish everybody a great afternoon, and thank you again for joining us today. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Right. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Kathy.